I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela to introduce an address by the head of state.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. On behalf of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, I am honored to introduce the President of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro Moros. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Distinguished President of the General Assembly, Volkan Bozkir, Distinguished Secretary General Antonio Gutierrez, heads of state, heads of government, leaders participating in this 75th session of the UN General Assembly. I should like to begin by apologizing for removing my mask, which is necessary during this pandemic. I extend my greetings to all of you throughout the world who are watching us and listening to us. I congratulate you, Mr. President, on behalf of the constitutional government of Venezuela and the people of our Bolivarian Republic on your assumption of the presidency at this 75th session of the General Assembly. It is a great occasion, an occasion of great importance given the extraordinary circumstances mankind is facing due to this global emergency caused by COVID-19. I say this is an extraordinary opportunity because in addition to being a very complex and difficult time for the planet, it is also an opportunity to give further thought to changing the paradigms which mankind has established, in particular the vast majority of people afflicted by poverty and exclusion. They hope for change from us, from the global leaders. At this same General Assembly in 2001, our eternal commander Hugo Chavez said, and I quote, "We have come here without fear. We've come here with a great deal of good faith, with a great deal of optimism in life, in brotherhood, in unity, and in the supreme possibility that today we, the leaders of the world's countries, can seek out and find genuine solutions to real problems, and that we can seek justice and peace." In Venezuela, we believe that the world needs to be completely revised, and we need to put it under a magnifying glass, as Commander Chavez would say, a very strong magnifying glass, because the world is suffering. It is suffering from mistakes that have been piled up on top of other mistakes. That was Commander Chavez's appeal in 2001 as he called for a reforging of the United Nations. And here we are in 2020, insisting on the need to renew these paradigms. Venezuela recognizes that the United Nations over the past 75 years has made major contributions to mankind. However, we need more goodwill and efforts to preserve these advances, to meet new goals. We insist on the need to strengthen South-South cooperation and to create alternative financial mechanisms and provide technical support which will underpin initiatives and priorities defined by our people so that we can achieve the SDGs. This is a timely task, one we cannot defer. Every day counts. The South is also thinking about these issues. The South is also important. The South also exists, as poet Benedetti would have said. We are all working to save our planet. We are calling for the greatest political commitment to combat climate change, which is a reality. Combating climate change is an urgent priority. We recognize the importance of strengthening our mitigation and adaptation measures in accordance with the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement. We therefore reaffirm the importance of implementation measures so that developing countries can carry out their climate actions. Noam Chomsky warned us quite recently, we do not have much time left. Mr. President, the United Nations and mankind, we are all facing a profound and complex crisis. We have the COVID-19 pandemic, and added to that, global challenges of climate change and sustainable development. With this disturbing backdrop, we also have the no less alarming desire of the great powers to bring mankind to the brink of military confrontation. Perhaps it would be the last confrontation for our species. The United States of America, rather than taking a positive or forward-looking leadership role, is erratically working under the guidance of an intransigent and hostile government. It's hostile to diplomacy, and it shows open contempt for multilateralism or any type of pre-existing global rules. COVID-19 has changed the realities and priorities for everyone because of its impact on human life. The pandemic has shed light on the inequalities in this world and made them worse. Regrettably, some short-term measures to deal with the pandemic have increased the social and economic gaps within countries, and that is why the international community as a whole must provide a global and coordinated response. Assistance must be provided to all nations in need so that conditions can be established to build stronger economies and more inclusive societies. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, the collapse of the international geoeconomic and geopolitical order was already taking place, and yet this emergency has made us more aware of the contradictions of capitalism and its inability to tackle this crisis. In many cases, states have been reduced to a minimalist expression, and neoliberalism that has been imposed on them has stifled public institutions. Health has become a luxury. Today, we hear people crying out in the streets, people who feel abandoned and who've been left unprotected. The health and well-being of the population are not commodities. The market cannot continue to regulate the destiny of mankind. Venezuela believes the role of the WHO must be an example of multilateralism that we must reinforce. The World Health Organization must be an organization which acts and speaks honestly without giving in to pressure or extortion or attacks from the powerful. It must reaffirm its moral authority, its scientific capacity, and cooperation based on solidarity. We welcome the enormous scientific efforts of sister nations such as Russia, China, and Cuba to come up with an effective and safe vaccine against COVID-19. And we trust that such discoveries will be deemed a global public good by each of our nations, with free access for all peoples of the world without discrimination. In the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, we propose the creation of a revolving fund of public purchasing in the UN system to guarantee access to food and to healthcare products. This would be financed through public resources. It would make it possible to tackle discrimination and overcome economic embargoes against countries, and make it possible for governments to acquire necessary goods and services. We call for a bolstering of policies and financial funding for development to promote local production chains and promote new economic actors. And we also call for the creation of a bank of technology for training. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela calls for the adoption of an international legally binding instrument on development and the right to development, which will bolster people's efforts to overcome poverty and social inequalities and to fight for social justice. Our re-election as a member of the United Nations Human Rights Council through sovereign majority vote of the countries represented in the UN system, despite tireless attacks by the U.S. empire and its supporters, has further reaffirmed our commitment to promote respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms of every individual without any distinction, and to do so in a just and fair manner. We firmly support any initiative to combat discrimination based on ethnicity, gender, nationality, or any other related form of intolerance. We are committed to defending the principles of universality, impartiality, objectivity, and the non-politicization and non-selective nature of implementing these principles. We are committed to international, intercultural, constructive dialogue to promote and protect all human rights. Of course, this includes the right of peoples to comprehensive development. Mr. President, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela reaffirms its commitment to a peaceful solution of disputes in accordance with the principles established in the UN Charter. And with regard to the territorial dispute over Guyana Esquiva, Venezuela reiterates its strict compliance with the Geneva Agreement of 1966. In particular, we underscore the purpose, the object, and the soundness of this Geneva Agreement, which clearly is mandated to find a practical, satisfactory, and acceptable solution for both parties through successive mechanisms provided for in Article 33 of the UN Charter. It is through political and diplomatic negotiations, by mutual agreement, that we will find a solution to this dispute which stems from imperial colonialism. Mr. President, the world has continued to face many injustices affecting innocent people, threatening them with their very lives, and these actions by states which are unjustifiable, inadmissible, and which are shameful to mankind. Once again, we express our solidarity and support to the Arab people of Palestine, and we call for respect of their historically established territories in 1967 by this organization. We endorse the United Nations appeal to bring an end to the shameful criminal embargo that has lasted for almost 60 years against the brotherly people of Cuba, and we reaffirm the appeal to the government of the United States to put an immediate end to this economic, commercial, and financial embargo against this sister nation. Mr. President, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela reiterates its commitment to the need to promote and strengthen dialogue and cooperation by building bridges among peoples, respecting cultural and religious differences, preventing conflicts, promoting reconciliation, and building peace. The non-aligned movement promotes these initiatives, these policies, these values by holding the International Day of Multilateralism and Diplomacy for Peace, and we have joined the UN Group of Friends for the Alliance of Civilizations in the United Nations. As we raise the flag of pluralism and equity, much remains to be done, and we will do it. Mr. President, as you know, Venezuela is under constant attack. Our beloved homeland is victim to a multi-pronged attack by the United States. In the media, in the political arena, economically, we have even been threatened with direct military aggression. Unilateral measures imposed by the U.S. government have been aimed at bringing Venezuelans to their knees, and yet our people, along with the constitutional government, have heroically resisted this indignity, this illegal action, and this inhumanity shown by this empire, which today represents the most serious threat facing our multipolar and multicentric world. Today we stand. We are the dignified people, sons of the glories of our liberator, Simon Bolivar, and we can tell this supremacist government of the United States that the world is looking at them, that in the 21st century there are millions of eyes that see behind the media networks. It's time to bring international law back into play. It is time the time has come to end this global loss of credibility as a result of the whims and arrogance you have heaped upon the world's conscience. To continue to violate the United Nations Charter will lead to isolation and to discredit and condemn the history of peoples, including your own people, the people of the United States, and bring them out into the streets to protest racism, police brutality, and abuse. These unilateral coercive measures have made people not just rise up against this global dictatorship, which attempts to impose national initiatives and impose them on us. Our national industry has been persecuted. This is the real Venezuela. These are the real Venezuelans in flesh and blood. I can tell you today, Excellencies, that there is a revolution ongoing in our homeland, a revolution for innovation, a new offensive to create a virtuous circle of opportunities and to counter these attempts to make our nation collapse. We have made extraordinary efforts with our own hands, in addition to the solidarity and cooperation we have received from friendly countries in the UN system to deal with the fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic. We've avoided the worst. Despite other plans, despite projections and catastrophic desires against us, neither an illegal embargo or aggression against our government have taken us off our path to protect the lives of our people. Today, I can say that we've provided some 1.9 million free tests to our people. The average is 62,489 tests per million inhabitants. We are a Latin American and Caribbean country, but the one that has provided the most COVID tests to its people. We do this with a great deal of humility and a desire to help neighboring countries, whose governments frequently express aggression to us. You will not hear about this in traditional media, nor on social networks or in the internet. But I wanted to stop here and share this experience with you because I think we can save lives elsewhere on the planet. We have gone through this experience with China, Cuba, and Russia. Our social and healthcare protection system meant that we were able to go from house to house and find positive cases and attend to suspected or potential cases. We have sent out medical missions, and we have automated protection systems known as our Homeland System. We have a list of more than 20 million citizens, elderly, out of a population of 30 million inhabitants. As you will see, that represents 2/3 of our population. We've been able to reach every single community in our country. We have our own model. It was designed based on the principle that we need to prioritize life above everything else. And thanks to these efforts, we've been able to combine social distancing with productive activity in the country. We've done this with our 7+7 scheme, and we offer it modestly to other nations. For 7 days, there is a 1-week stay-in-place order, strict quarantine, and then 7 days later we have a more open general economic work week. This has enabled us to work towards a new normal and help us overcome this pandemic. Our government is ready to meet the challenge of this pandemic along with our people. Our people have become increasingly aware of the need to combat the pandemic, and this has shown the effectiveness of our public health care system. We were able to control the initial outbreaks of this pandemic, which impacted the world, and that bought us time so that we could improve all of our protocols for prevention, treatment, and protection for our people. Venezuela is one of the few countries which provides free and differentiated treatment for detected cases, and that is all cases, asymptomatic, slightly symptomatic, moderately symptomatic, and seriously symptomatic. Our policy for prevention and care means that we hospitalize all the positive case patients, even if they do not present symptoms, and that has helped keep a lid on the spread of this illness. Mr. President, more than $30 million of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela have been seized, frozen, and held in bank accounts in the United States and Europe. In addition to that, they go after any business or government which trades any goods or services with our country, be it food, medicine, fuel, additives needed to produce gasoline, which our people need, etc., etc. And that is why we reaffirm to the world that Venezuela is prepared to resist, and we are resisting this criminal, inhuman aggression. Venezuela has been prepared to win out over this embargo imposed by the U.S. government. We are fighting for peace, for our homeland, for our region, for humanity. Our heroic Venezuelan people in the past have shouldered the responsibility of their historic role as we have faced the disgraces of the most dangerous empire in the history of the world. This empire is now writing some of the most horrific chapters of inhumanity and criminal behavior. The world must know that we are prepared to fight against this with the force of our history, of our spirit, of our reason, and with the support of international law. Once again, I express our deepest thanks to the Secretary General and the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, who have called for an immediate lifting of unilateral criminal coercive measures which run counter not just to the UN Charter, but are clear obstacles imposed on countries who are attempting to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic and meet the SDGs. As you know, attacks are not just limited to unilateral coercive measures. On the 3rd of May, Venezuela thwarted an attempted invasion by sea, a group of mercenaries and terrorists who were financed by the U.S. government and trained in Colombia. And this was done with the full, complete support of the U.S. government and the U.S. and Colombian government. This group of terrorists were stopped by our police and military union. They were neutralized and captured. Those who perpetrated this attack against Venezuela were arrested, and they are now before our judicial bodies. Recently, we also captured a U.S. spy who had weapons and documents on our oil and electric industry. We face a daily siege. We've been dismantling these attacks, denouncing them, unmasking them one after another. And I wonder, how would you characterize a terrorist action in the midst of such extraordinary humanitarian circumstances as COVID-19? How would humanity characterize this action? The very least one could say is that this is a disproportionate action. It's one of the worst sins being carried out by the U.S. elite. And that is why the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela reiterates the need to reaffirm the principles of respect for sovereignty, self-determination of peoples expressed in the UN Charter, which unites all of us. The illegal violation of that charter by some member states of this organization, motivated by despicable reasons, is endangering the stability of our country and our Latin American and Caribbean region. Peace-loving countries must rise up and make the United States understand that in the midst of a pandemic, no one understands nor can they explain this resurgence of criminal persecution and of this embargo against such noble countries as Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Syria, Iran, and other sister countries in the world. We must demand a cessation of all unilateral coercive measures, of all sanctions. Let our people exercise their own rights, the right to development and peace. The United States and its government must abandon this age-old practice of criminalizing those who do not bend to their will in this world. We will continue to maintain our policy of independence and sovereignty. It must be said, the United States throughout history has become one of the most significant threats to peace in this world. We wish to echo the words of the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. We endorse his comments on calling for a global ceasefire and an end to conflicts in the world, calling for strict respect for the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and of international law, in particular respect for sovereignty, territorial integrity, and non-interference in the internal affairs of states, promoting dialogue among nations, the peaceful settlement of disputes, and prohibiting the threat or the use of force. Mr. President, traditionally Venezuela has been a host country for refugees and migrants. However, as a direct consequence of the criminal, unilateral coercive measures and the economic aggression imposed by the government of the United States on our people, there is currently a migration of our citizens, primarily for economic reasons. However, at the current time, our country is now experiencing a massive wave of voluntary returnees, thousands of Venezuelan migrants who are returning from countries with extremely high levels of COVID-19, such as Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Chile, and Brazil. And they are returning for a number of reasons, but the most important is the failure of those countries to manage COVID-19. And secondly, because of the systematic violation of the human rights of Venezuelan migrants, the use of age-old and xenophobic policies against the migrants from our country, including at the highest levels of government in these countries. There's been discrimination, mistreatment, lack of socioeconomic conditions, situations of semi-servitude, trafficking in persons, indignities that our people have suffered as migrants. And what has the reaction of the world been? We wonder who is concerned for Venezuela facing such reprehensible acts. Silence is complicity. As we've said, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a serious impact on the unsustainable living conditions of thousands of migrants in those recipient countries. They've reported a rise in neglect, a lack of response and care by the authorities of those countries. We clearly see the fragile nature of the social protection networks in these countries, which at times are held up as economic and social models. And we wonder once again, how is it possible, despite the enormous amount of money that has been given to these governments through these extravagant donor conferences for Venezuelan migrants, what's happened with that money? Have the governments stolen it? We think that we must seriously reconsider the role that some UN agencies have been playing, or that has been played by some individuals representing these agencies, such as the UNHCR and the International Migration Organization. Mr. President, by way of reconciliation and through agreements reached in our National Dialogue Roundtable among the political parties in Venezuela in September 2019, we have taken a series of measures to benefit democracy in Venezuela. Recently, we pardoned 110 citizens belonging to the opposition right charged with various crimes of aggression against our country. And with that decision, we hope to continue to work towards national reconciliation. We believe that peace deserves every effort, and we will continue with our efforts in this very difficult task. We are complying with the mandates established in our national constitution, adopted by referendum by the Venezuelan people in December 1999, and therefore, on Sunday, the 6th of December this year, we will hold the 25th democratic election in the past 20 years. This will be done to renew the legislative power with the participation of more than 14,400 candidates, more than 107 political organizations from across the national ideological spectrum. In Venezuela, I can assure you that all necessary guarantees will be there to hold these elections, and we therefore invite the world to come and to witness our living democracy. No one can deny the Venezuelan people the right to elect their new legislative power, because this is a key tool for collective existence, and it will be the expression of the will for constitutional power. No one will make that decision for Venezuelans. We do not intervene or attempt to make that decision in any other nation. We are respectful, and therefore we demand respect. The government of Washington, which has brought its own people to the brink of collapse as a result of the pandemic, and which will hold presidential elections in November, in clear violation of international law, illegally imposed new unilateral coercive measures against the democratic Venezuelan institutions, in this case, the electoral branch, in an attempt to interfere in the holding of parliamentary elections provided for in our Constitution. And that is why the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela reiterates the need to reassert the principles of respecting sovereignty and self-determination of peoples expressed in the UN Charter. The illegal violation of this charter by some member states of this country, this organization, is an attempt to bring Venezuela to violence and to conflict. We will not allow that to happen. We demand respect. Venezuela has chosen the path of peace, democracy, freedom, voting, participation, and the will of the people. This is the way it has always been, and this is the way it will continue to be. Mr. President, authorities of the world, heads of state, heads of government, Venezuela is here, standing strong with our historic dignity. We live in peace. We are prepared for new challenges. We are prepared for new victories. I take my leave of you, wishing you unity, peace, and cooperation for the entire world. Thank you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela for the statement just made. I now